A long time ago, there was a lonely house in the middle of the woods near a small village. An elderly woman known for her potions and herbal collections lived there. The locals believed she was a good witch because she never harmed anyone and cured many of various diseases. Sadly, the granny passed away, and the old house remained empty for a long time. One day, a hunter named Billy noticed smoke coming from the chimney and saw that someone had cleared the thick grass and nettles surrounding the abandoned building. The villagers were curious about who had decided to move into the strange house near the swamp, especially since they believed it was haunted. Because of these ghostly tales, no one had ever picked cranberries near the swamp, even though the largest berries grew there. Eventually, a woman with a child arrived in the village. The villagers realized she was the granddaughter of the old witch, who used to visit her grandmother when she was alive. At that time, she wasn't married. Living in the countryside was hard, and living in an old hut away from others was even harder. The woman probably had personal reasons for choosing such a strange and mysterious place to live. From that day on, the villagers saw her at the grocery store almost every week. After all, they needed food, as mushrooms and berries were not enough for a child who needed soup and oatmeal every day. Tessa had always been a typical city dweller. She graduated from the University of Economics and became an accountant, but couldn't find a job for a long time because all employers wanted experienced workers. However, the owner of a fast-growing company sympathized with her and hired her as an assistant to the chief accountant. Soon she met her future husband, a successful entrepreneur, and they got married a year later. At first, the relationship between the newlyweds was normal. When Tessa went on maternity leave, her boss was upset, regretting that he wouldn't see his favorite employee for a long time. However, the future mother promised to visit and help occasionally. The CEO's attitude towards Tessa was good, even friendly, treating her almost like his own daughter. Soon she gave birth to twins, and her husband, Liam, was overjoyed. But fate decided to test their relationship. One of the twins fell ill and died from an unknown disease. Despite their wealth and access to expensive medicines, none of the doctors could determine what had happened. Science could not help. Tessa struggled to cope with her son's death, suffering from depression, losing a lot of weight, hardly sleeping, and constantly crying. This tragedy began to strain their marriage. Liam started drinking heavily, cheating on her, and sometimes not coming home at night. Tessa hoped her husband would come to his senses, taking care of the household and her surviving son. But while Liam drank and neglected his business, his competitors took advantage. Very soon, his successful business collapsed. The Internal Revenue Service had already sent representatives to seize their property, but they could not do so without the owner. Besides, they didn't want to kick a woman with a baby out onto the street. Liam showed up at home unexpectedly and immediately started blaming his wife. He said that Tessa was responsible for their son's death and the collapse of the profitable business, and his drinking and infidelity didn't matter. He believed every man had a right to relax. Then he decided to take her baby away from her, strip her of her maternal rights, and become a single father. He hoped to persuade the tax assessors to give him time to try to save his business. That's why Tessa escaped from him to this remote village. She managed to take a small amount of money to survive with her son. None of Liam's relatives knew about this abandoned house, so he could only find Tessa by chance, and the villagers would never tell anything to strangers. The locals never spread rumors about their neighbors. Several years passed, and Wesley was growing up. Life in the pristine nature was beneficial to him, and his great-grandmother's genes began to show. The boy was not afraid of the woods or wild animals, and the animals never approached him. In summer, he enjoyed long walks in the woods but never went near the swamp. His mother had warned him that it was very dangerous and that if he stumbled, he would be immediately swallowed by it. One day, she demonstrated the swamp's power to him. While collecting firewood for the winter, they found a dead birch tree at the swamp's edge. Tessa dropped the tree into the swamp, and bubbles rose up as the 5-meter trunk disappeared in the murky water within moments, as if it had never existed. Wesley often recalled this moment in his nightmares, waking up covered in sweat from fear, and thus he never approached the swamp. One day, while walking in the woods, Wesley saw a wolf cub that had fallen into a deep hole. The poor animal couldn't get out, and its mother hadn't found it yet. Wesley lay down on the edge of the hole and pulled the animal out. The cub was soaking wet and shivering, so the boy put it under his warm jacket. At that moment, a worried she-wolf emerged from the bushes. An encounter with a she-wolf could have ended badly for the boy, but apparently his guardian angel was always on guard. The wolf cub, now warmed up, escaped from Wesley's hands with a joyful squeal and ran to its mother, whimpering as if begging her not to hurt the boy. A miracle happened. The she-wolf only looked at the child, then turned around and went into the woods with her cub. Since then, Wesley and the little wolf often met near the woods and played in the meadow. The she-wolf sometimes appeared nearby, but she never came close, only watching from afar. Local hunter Billy often visited Tessa and brought rabbit or duck meat. Tessa helped him too, saving the elderly man from many diseases. She had inherited a notebook from her grandmother, filled with unique recipes and indications of where to pick herbs. Tessa made potions and supplied them to all the villagers whenever someone fell ill. The villagers begged Billy to go to Tessa for medicine. That's how the woman could get fresh eggs, dairy products, and other foods since she had already run out of the money she had taken from her unfaithful husband. She survived as best she could. Tessa communicated only with the old hunter and a saleswoman. Since she had no money, she traded her potions and herbs for food. She also learned to bake bread at home and used honey from wild bees instead of sugar. Tessa had learned where to find honey from her grandmother's notebook. One day, when Wesley was already 6 years old, Billy knocked on her door early in the morning and told her that a man from the city was looking for her. "Please don't be mad at me for showing the way to your house to a stranger," he said. He needed to talk to you urgently. After these words, a man dressed in a business suit and white shirt entered the house. "Good morning. My name is Henry. I am a notary, and I have to give you an official letter which you should read later, preferably when you are alone. In short, you are required to come to my office on the date specified in the letter for the reading of a will." The strange visitor didn't explain anything else. He only asked Billy to walk him to the bus station because he didn't want to go by car to the middle of nowhere. When the visitors left, Tessa sat down at the table to think about this strange situation. What will was the notary talking about? Tessa had no wealthy relatives. Her husband was young and healthy. He couldn't be dead. Besides, he would hardly bequeath anything to her. He would rather take everything away from her. When the excited woman opened the envelope, she read the official document and realized that while she was still living in the city, before she met her future husband, she got a job in a successful company. The head of the HR department didn't want to hire the young girl as an accountant because she had no work experience, but the CEO said he would give her a chance. Tessa was doing great at work and once even saved her boss from death when he had a heart attack in the office. The young employee immediately gave him the right medication and then called an ambulance. If it wasn't for her, Brandon would have died right in the office. Fortunately, Tessa had taken a medical training course at the university and then even worked part-time at the hospital near her dormitory, so she knew exactly what to do. After returning from the hospital, Brandon promised to thank his savior generously. But soon, Tessa got married, went on maternity leave, and then left the city to save herself from her husband. Only this businessman could include Tessa in his will because, when she was hired, she provided her grandmother's address as her primary residence, as her place of registration. That's how the notary found her, but he didn't dare walk through the unfamiliar woods by himself and ask the locals for help, so Billy escorted him. Unfortunately, Brandon was probably dead, as Tessa was invited to the city next week to attend the reading of the will. His relatives would likely be there, and she anticipated a scandal. Tessa didn't want that in her life, which had been so smooth and quiet until now. Brandon was a very successful man, with his company generating a good income. However, his personal life was less successful. His wife had been ill for a long time, and one day, her heart failed and stopped. They had no children together. Brandon only had a son and daughter from his first marriage. He treated his stepchildren well, but they never appreciated it. Arthur and Victoria lost their mother when they were teenagers and never really liked their stepfather, despite the financial support he provided. Brandon paid for their studies at a prestigious university and even rented them a nice apartment downtown. However, Arthur and Victoria were irresponsible in their studies, believing they would never need education or work, because their stepfather's money would be enough for the rest of their lives. They liked to spend their free time in nightclubs and restaurants. Arthur even asked Brandon to give him one of his cars to take his girlfriends to clubs and bars. The elderly man realized his children's behavior was unacceptable, but continued to cover their expenses, warning them that their carefree life would only last until graduation. After that, they would need to survive on their own. Brandon was not going to bequeath his real estate and business to his stepchildren, knowing they would ruin everything in a few years and likely sell the company to competitors for pennies. Remembering his promise, Brandon bequeathed almost all his property and business to Tessa, only giving his stepchildren the car Arthur was already driving and an apartment in a luxury neighborhood where he didn't live. Brandon loved the fresh air, so he resided in a fancy house constructed according to a unique design on a plot near the lake in a private neighborhood. A personal driver took him to the city every morning. Brandon had excellent employees who handled all the projects while he supervised the business. A trustworthy person was in charge of the company, making it a great team of professionals who had worked together for years. Brandon knew he could trust each of them. Additionally, there was a very experienced lawyer who had saved Arthur from various criminal cases. If it hadn't been for Brandon, Arthur would have been in jail a long time ago. Tessa couldn't believe that she would become the owner of such wealth. Wesley was supposed to start school in the autumn, but she had no money for a school uniform and other necessities. Now, however, she might become a very wealthy woman, yet there would be more problems too. To claim the inheritance, she needed to go to the city, which meant there was a chance she would encounter her husband, who had been searching for her everywhere to take away her son. The wise businessman anticipated that Tessa might have financial problems, so there was money for the first time and a bank card in a separate envelope. When Wesley found out they were going to the city where they would live permanently, he wasn't happy. The child only asked his mom for time to say goodbye to his friend. "I don't think we'll need the food that's in the pantry. I mean the rabbit meat. Do you want to give it to the wolf?" "I don't mind," said Tessa. "Say goodbye to your friend because we're not coming back here anytime soon. We may never come back." "I'll come here on vacation," the little boy sighed. It didn't take long to pack because they had almost no belongings. The letter suggested that she temporarily stay in the city apartment. The address was also mentioned in the letter, and the envelope contained the key. Tessa said goodbye to Billy, asking him to take care of the house, and then they went to the bus station to get to the city. The first thing Tessa did was go to the nearest mall to get some new clothes. Then she bathed her son while he watched cartoons. After his bath, she enjoyed a hot bath herself. Then she made a cup of strong coffee, and suddenly the phone rang. It was the driver who had arrived to take them to the notary for the reading of the will. All the involved parties arrived at the office. Arthur and Victoria were sure they would get all the property since Brandon had no other heirs, so they looked at Tessa in surprise, not understanding what this stranger was doing there. When the notary announced the will, the brother and sister turned pale. Their stepfather had bequeathed them only an apartment and a damaged car. Arthur was shocked, having hoped to take his stepfather's new car from the garage. "Are you sure you read the will correctly? Aren't there any additions in there?" Arthur whispered. "I'm sure. For now, Tessa and her son can live in the mentioned apartment, but the will comes into force in 3 days, so Tessa will move into the house by the lake, and you will get the apartment as well as the car that Arthur likes to drive at night," said the notary. "We can contest this will through the court, saying that our stepfather was mentally ill when he signed the papers," Victoria shouted angrily. "That's your right, but I would like to remind you that Brandon's lawyer will now defend the rights of Tessa, and this is a very experienced lawyer. He hasn't lost a single case." When the upset Arthur and Victoria left the office, the notary explained the entire inheritance process to Tessa. "You will be the legal owner of all the property and business in 3 days," the notary said. "I will accompany you to the company office and introduce you to the employees." Tessa replied, "I don't understand anything about this business. I worked for this company as an assistant, but I still don't know all the nuances." "You will have reliable assistance. Brandon has taken care of that in advance, and all legal issues will be solved by your lawyer, Patrick. And you already know Albert, he is your driver, and he will also help you." The next morning, Tessa and Wesley had a fabulous start. They went to the mall and bought everything a schoolboy needs, from a trendy backpack to a school uniform and comfortable shoes. Wesley was incredibly pleased. Following Albert's advice, Tessa chose a business suit and shoes for her first meeting with the staff. "You know we can never change a first impression," Albert advised. "First of all, they will look at your appearance, and only then will they evaluate your business skills. But don't worry, after lunch I will bring your assistants, and they will do their best to explain all the details to you." "I'm so worried." "Thank you for your help, Albert. I really appreciate it," Tessa replied. The meeting with the assistants was very productive. They turned out to be quite young professionals. Brandon had realized that Tessa would not be able to immediately understand all the details of the business, even though she had a university degree in economics. So he prepared several trustworthy assistants. Brandon's deputy, Scott, was the leader of this team. He assured Tessa that the company was thriving and generating a good income because Brandon carefully chose each employee and each project was managed by an experienced professional. We keep everything under control, and I will immediately report the slightest changes to you. At first I'll be in charge of everything, but don't worry, you'll make the final decisions. There is no reason to worry. We have no strong competitors in this city, and other branches are doing well, though not as fast as we wish. Tomorrow, the notary will introduce me to the employees of the main office. I am very nervous about how the staff will accept the new owner, Tessa said. You know, everyone is only interested in two things: whether you will fire anyone or extend the working hours. We are not in favor of tightening working conditions. Every employee is reliable and does the job perfectly. In general, the whole team works smoothly and accurately. Brandon got rid of all the untrustworthy and lazy employees long ago. Only professionals remain. And that's why we have high salaries. The employees are not planning to quit after Brandon's death because everyone values their positions. Everyone knows each other, trusts each other, and we do not disclose trade secrets. We rarely hire new people, only when one of the women goes on maternity leave. But in this case, there is minimal access to classified documentation. After the meeting with the assistants, Tessa felt encouraged. Now she wasn't as afraid of the first meeting with the staff as she was before. Besides, Scott made a good impression on her. It was obvious that the man really loved his job. Tessa caught herself thinking, I wonder if he's married. A month had passed since Tessa returned to the city. The woman had already mastered managing the business. She began her workday with a briefing with all the assistants, as Scott had advised. Then she would listen to a brief report from the branch managers and delve into the nuances of running the company with the help of the head counselor. Before lunch, Tessa would go to the accounting department to talk to the chief accountant. This is where she felt most confident. She had a guard who accompanied her everywhere, so no one could approach her on the street. She saw her husband a few times. Liam tried to approach her, but unsuccessfully. Tessa warned the head of security that her husband was a sneaky jerk. Wesley also had a personal bodyguard who drove him to school, waited for classes to end, and then brought him home. Tessa was afraid that her husband would try to kidnap her son to blackmail her, so she asked the lawyer to prepare the papers for a divorce. However, her husband made such demands that she could not accept. Your husband wants too much. He is willing to divorce you and not claim his son only if you give him 50% of the company's profits. But that's unacceptable. He doesn't have much chance, but he won't leave you alone because by law both parents have equal rights. He'll try to manipulate you. By the way, what about his business? Is it prospering? Tessa asked. I don't know exactly, but since he's demanding a share of your profits, his business is probably doing poorly. I can find out for sure, the lawyer replied. That would be good. In the meantime, I'll think about how to stop him. Do you have a reliable private investigator who can collect information quickly and discreetly? Tessa asked. A week later, the detective put the investigation report on the CEO's desk. Tessa learned that her ex-husband had serious problems with one of his competitors, who could take over all his assets and bankrupt Liam, but he lacked some money to carry out his plan. Tessa decided to talk to her deputy, Scott, and ask how to resolve the problem with her husband. Scott asked for a couple of days to delve into the problem. On the appointed day, Scott reported that he had a plan that was simple, legal, and effective. If we financially support your husband's competitor, the competitor will bankrupt the businessman. At best, he will be left with only a small house where his elderly mother lives. All other property will be seized and sold to pay off his debts. Given his financial situation, the chances that the court will give him the child are zero. Thank you, Scott. Great job. And now it's time to talk to him. Tell the head of security that I'm ready for a meeting on neutral ground, for example, in a crowded place. A restaurant would be a great place, Tessa said. Liam had not expected Tessa to agree to a meeting so quickly. He was sure she would accept his terms and was already thinking about where he would spend the money. But an unpleasant surprise awaited him. You want half of my company's profits, Liam? I'm not the same Tessa who ran away from you years ago. Don't you realize it's not your wife in front of you but a successful businesswoman with bodyguards and business assistants who can ruin your whole life, Tessa said. Tessa, I've been in business for years, and you're just a beginner. I mean, how can you harm me? Don't even try to intimidate me. You'll only get a divorce under my terms. There's no other way, and now I should go, Liam said, getting up and slowly walking out of the restaurant. But he didn't get far. People in bailiff uniforms approached him, showed him some papers, and then took the confused businessman into a black van. Where are they taking him? Tessa asked, first to the court and then to seize the property. His competitor fulfilled his promise. Your ex-husband is left with only a small house and a few meters of land to use as a vegetable garden, Scott replied. Patrick, when can we file for divorce? Tessa asked. I have already prepared all the necessary paperwork and will bring it to the district court tomorrow morning. The judge's secretary will call us and inform us of the time of the court hearing. Everything will be fine now, don't worry, Patrick reassured her. Tessa noticed that Scott had arrived alone. He was a couple of years older than Tessa, but it turned out he was single. Choosing a convenient moment, she went to the veranda with the head of security and asked him about Scott's life. Scott was married, but his marriage didn't last long as his wife was not happy that he was spending a lot of time at work. Back then, we were just starting the business, so together with Brandon we worked from dawn to dusk. As a result, she filed for divorce 3 years later and then left the city. It took Scott a long time to recover, but then he devoted himself to the business. How long ago was that? Tessa asked. It's been 5 or 6 years. I don't remember exactly, but I can find out. No need, it's not really important. Thanks for the information. I hope no one will find out anything about our conversation. Don't worry, Tessa. I've already forgotten what we just talked about, the head of security assured her. For many years, Tessa lived only for her son, doing everything to make him happy. But she realized that the boy needed a father. Now that she was financially secure, Tessa decided it was time to think about her personal life. However, she had nowhere to meet a decent man as she didn't go anywhere except the office. That's why she focused her attention on Scott, the only single man she knew. They constantly communicated on work matters and were often alone in the office. She realized that her deputy would never allow himself to flirt with his boss, so she decided to take the first step herself. She was helped by fate, or rather by a planned event. One Friday, after a morning briefing, Scott informed her that today was a shortened working day at the company because they had a corporate party in a nightclub that night. Every year we throw a party for all the employees. We party until dawn because there are 2 weekends ahead. Brandon established this tradition, although he never participated in such parties. He used to say he was too old for dancing and drinking in a nightclub, Scott explained. I will gladly attend the party, but I will ask you to be my date for tonight if you have no other candidates for it, Tessa said. I have been divorced for a long time and only attend such events because it's my responsibility to watch them and make sure everything is fine. Taking advantage of my position, I am canceling your responsibility for tonight. I have never attended such parties. I really want to attend it, but not as a boss. I just want to relax and have fun. And one more thing, when we are alone, let's communicate as equals, not as a boss and a subordinate. Are you okay with that, Scott? I think your decision is absolutely right, Tessa. Scott replied. It was obvious that he was happy about this turn of events. Tessa's first corporate party went great. The subordinates felt a little uncomfortable for a few minutes, but an hour later the atmosphere was normal. Everyone was having fun and drinking cocktails. Everyone noticed that Tessa and Scott danced together, chatting and laughing all night long. The relationship between them quickly became romantic. Although they didn't show it in public, everyone saw the spark in the eyes of the strict boss when she looked at her deputy. One day, Tessa summoned Scott into her office for advice. I've been hiding from my husband in the middle of nowhere for a long time, and I'd like to thank the residents of that little village for their help and for not ratting me out to my husband's detectives. But how to do that? You know, Billy often shared food with me and was the link between me and the villagers. Scott pondered for a moment. How about organizing a small event or gathering in the village? You could provide supplies, food, and maybe even some entertainment as a thank you. It could be a way to give back to the community and show your appreciation. That's a wonderful idea, Tessa said. I'll start planning it right away. Thank you, Scott, for always being there to help me. I'm always here for you, Tessa. Scott replied with a warm smile. I think I should give Billy a good hunting weapon. However, I don't know how to choose one since I don't know anything about it, Tessa said. It's not a problem, Scott replied. My schoolmate owns a weapons store, so he'll help us make a decent choice. As for the whole village, we should think about what they're lacking. I've lived there and know what they really need. First of all, we need to build a first aid station and a new grocery store because the building of the local store is about to collapse. We have a charitable foundation, so we'll allocate money for that. I have a friend who works in construction. He will build everything you need in the shortest possible time. 3 years passed, and a small hospital and a store were built in the remote village. All the residents were overjoyed. Billy bragged to other hunters about his new rifle. Life became joyful again, but only the old hunter knew who breathed new life into their village. Tessa's company was thriving, although she temporarily didn't run it because she got married and gave birth to a baby girl who turned 1-year-old in August. However, the young mother didn't have to worry about her business because her husband was coping perfectly well, and she was happy to devote herself to raising her children. They had a modest wedding, although almost all the employees were invited because they were like a big family. The paparazzi tried to shoot exclusive material, but the head of security didn't let anyone go further than the restaurant's entrance. Once, on a cloudy summer day, Tessa was spending time with the kids on the second floor of their house. Wesley was already in 4th grade. Scott had given him a laptop for his birthday, so that the boy could not only play but also master computer science. The young mother was playing with her daughter with colorful cubes, and her son was trying to complete another level in an educational computer game but could not compose a phrase correctly. Wesley, no rush. Remember what your father taught you. Check your notebook where you write down difficult phrases and everything will work out. But now take a rest and play with your sister while I go out to the gate. There's some strange visitor there, Tessa said. A poorly dressed man with a 3-week stubble was standing near the ajar gate, trying to explain something to the guard. A poorly dressed man with a 3-week stubble was standing near the ajar gate, trying to explain something to the guard. Michael, what does he want? Tessa asked. He's wondering if we need a janitor, Michael replied. Looking closer, Tessa could hardly recognize her ex-husband in the visitor. Without any regrets, she said, "Let him go further down the alley. I remember our neighbor was looking for a janitor."